Oh, yeah. A gentleman friend and I were dining at the Ritz last evening, and he said that if I took a pencil and paper and put down all of my thoughts, it would make a book. This almost made me smile, as what it would really make would be a whole row of encyclopedias. I mean, I seem to be thinking practically all of the time. I mean, it's my favorite recreation, and sometimes I sit for hours and do not seem to do anything but think. So this gentleman said a girl with brains ought to do something else with them besides think. And he said he ought to know brains when he sees them, because he is in the Senate, and he spends quite a deal of time in Washington, D.C. And when he comes into contact with brains, he always notices it. So it might have been all blown over, but this morning he sent me a book. And so when my mind brought it to me, I said to her, "Well, Lulu, here's another book, and we've not read half the ones we've got yet." But when I opened it and saw that it was all a blank, I remembered what my gentleman acquaintance said, and so then I realized that it was a diary. So here I am, writing a book instead of reading one. But now it is the 16th of March, and of course it's too late to begin with January. But it does not matter, as my gentleman friend, Mr. Eisman, was in town practically all of January and February, and when he is in town, one day seems to be practically the same as the next day. I mean, Mr. Eisman is in the wholesale button profession in Chicago, and he is a gentleman who is known practically all over Chicago as Gus Eisman, the Button King. And he is the gentleman who is interested in educating me. So, of course, he is always coming down. "Hello, how are you?" "Good. I'm just reading something into it." "Yeah." Okay. So, of course, he's always coming down to New York to see how my brains have improved since the last time. But when Mr. Eisman is in New York, we always seem to do the same thing. And if I wrote down one day in my diary, all I would have to do would be to put quotation marks for all other days. I mean, we always seem to have dinner at the Colony, and see a show, and go to the Trocadero, and then Mr. Eisman shows me to my apartment. So, of course, when a gentleman is interested in educating a girl, he likes to stay and talk about the topics of the day until quite late. So I'm quite fatigued the next day, and I do not really get up until it's time to dress for dinner at the Colony. It would be strange if I turn out to be an authoress. And here's that illustration. I mean, at my home near Little Rock, Arkansas, my family all wanted me to do something about my music, because all my friends said I had talent, and they all kept after me about practicing. But some way I never seemed to care so much about practicing. I mean, I simply could not sit for hours and hours at a time practicing just for the sake of a career. So one day I got quite temperamental and threw the old mandolin clear across the room, and I have really never touched it since. But writing is different, because if you do not have to learn or practice, and it is more temperamental, because practicing seems to take all the temperament out of me. So now I really just have to smile, because I've just noticed that I've written clear across 2 pages on March 18th. So this will do for today and tomorrow. And it just shows how temperamental I am when I get started. March 19th. Well, last evening Dorothy called up, and Dorothy said she had met a gentleman who gave himself an introduction to her in the lobby of the Ritz. So then we went to the luncheon and tea and dinner, and then they went to a show, and then they went to Trocadero. So Dorothy said his name was Lord Cooksley, but what she really calls him is Cuckoo. So Dorothy said, why don't you and I and Cuckoo go to the Follies tonight and bring Gus along if he is in town? So then Dorothy and I had quite a little quarrel, because every time that Dorothy mentions the subject of Mr. Eisman, she calls Mr. Eisman by his first name, and she does not seem to realize that when a gentleman who is as important as Mr. Eisman spends quite a lot of money educating a girl, it really does not show reverence to call a gentleman by his first name. I mean, I never even think of calling Mr. Eisman by his first name, but I want to call him anything at all. I call him Daddy, and I do not even call him Daddy if a place seems to be public. So I told Dorothy that Mr. Eisman would not be in town until day after tomorrow. So then Dorothy and Coco came up, and we went to the Follies. So this morning Coco called up, and he wanted me to luncheon at the Ritz. I mean, these foreigners really have quite a nerve. Just because Coco is an Englishman and a lord, he thinks the girl can waste hours on him just for a luncheon at the Ritz, when all he does is talk about some exposition he went on to a place called Tibet. And after talking for hours, I found out that all they were was a lot of Chinamen. So I will be quite glad to see Mr. Eisman when he gets in, because he always has something quite interesting to talk about. As for instance, the last time he was here, he presented me with quite a beautiful emerald bracelet. So next week is my birthday, and he always has some delightful surprise on holidays. I did intend to luncheon at the Ritz with Dorothy today, and of course Coco had to spoil it, as I told him that I could not luncheon with him today because my brother was in town on business and had the mumps, so I really could not leave him alone, because of course if I went to the Ritz now I would bump into Coco. But I sometimes almost have to smile at my own imagination, because of course I have not got any brother, and I have not even thought of the mumps for years. I mean, it's no wonder that I can write. So the reason I thought I would take luncheon at the Ritz was because Mr. Chaplin is at the Ritz, and I always like to renew old acquaintances, because I met Mr. Chaplin once when we were both working on the same lot in Hollywood, and I'm sure he would remember me. Gentlemen always seem to remember blondes. I mean, the only career I would like to be besides an authoress is a cinema star. And I was doing quite well in the cinema when Mr. Eisman made me give it all up. Because, of course, when a gentleman takes such a friendly interest in educating a girl as Mr. Eisman does, you like to show that you appreciate it. And he is against a girl being in the cinema because his mother is Orthodox. March 20th.